Friday night at the movies, SVA, MFA photo, video. We used to call ourselves Related Media too, but now it's Lens and Screen Arts. I'm Charles Traub, I'm the chairperson, and I welcome all of you. There's a lot of fresh faces here. I welcome all the students, and I welcome all our staff, and particularly Grahame Weinbren, my friend, colleague, and fellow teacher. We teach a course called Still and Moving Together, which is sort of the idea of this department. And Grahame is a distinct... It's me who's not working. Did you all hear the first part? I think so. Grahame and I teach a course together called Still and Moving, which sort of relates the still image to the moving image, the lens image, its history, theory, practice, and sort of why we do this. It relates everything we do here in this space. This space is our new space called the Big Room. We use it for all kinds of public events, and if any of you have some kind of special event you're interested in using this for, and it relates to our mission, contact us. Tonight, Grahame, who is a distinguished video artist, film artist, still and moving, experimental, documentary, editor, teacher, and also editor of the Millennium Film Journal, is going to introduce tonight's wonderful guest, who we are very happy to have.
I'm actually going to introduce Sam when he comes, which is after the screening. Right now, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about the film and a little bit about Sam that maybe is more to do with our department than Sam as a filmmaker. Sam Pollard is an old friend of mine. I won't say how many decades I've known him for, but it's quite a lot. And he has been a part of our department in some ways for maybe 15 years. He advises our thesis students sometimes. And I was just going to tell you that the last student that I remember him advising was when we had an ex-Brooklyn cop as a student here, who wasn't quite somebody that we quite knew how to help. So we asked Sam to be her thesis advisor. I wonder if he remembers. You remember? Yeah. Yes, and the first one in this department. I saw this film, Two Trains, at the New York Film Festival last year, and I have to say I was completely blown away. It has everything that you can imagine could be in a film. Race, politics, music, animation, drama, everything. It's like a Gesamtkunstwerk. And I was so taken with it that I immediately tried to see if Sam could come, and it's taken this long to get him here. So we're first going to show the film, and then Sam will show up at the end, and he and I will have a little conversation, and then we'll open it to questions from you. So that's it. It's Two Trains. It's by Sam Pollard. It's about 90 minutes long, and at the end, Sam and I will sit here and we'll talk to you. So thank you.
Away. earliest days are lost to time, and many of those who made the first blues recordings disappeared soon after, leaving only their names to future generations. Until, improbably, a few young men decided to go off in search of these legends. Their quest brought them to Mississippi in the summer of 1964, just as another group, drawn by the civil rights movement, was also venturing south. Both would awaken America to the value of black life, but at a cost. There were two trains running that summer, and they would meet one fateful Sunday in June.
February 1st, 1960, Negro students launched a movement that electrified the nation, the sit-ins.
It's not jazz around here anymore. It's folk music. Welcome to Hootenanny.
National Guard troops were moved into Oxford, Mississippi to enforce the Supreme Court edict that a Negro must be registered at the University of Mississippi.
And I say segregation now, segregation tomorrow, and segregation forever.
By 1963, Negro groups decided to make voting a major goal.
When you come down into the flat, hot country of the South, and you hear a different kind of music.
A great change is at hand. Those who do nothing are inviting shame as well as violence.
June 12, 1963, a sniper's bullet killed Medgar Evers. August 28th, more than 200,000 people marched on Washington for jobs and freedom for Negroes.
Filibuster on civil rights is now in its 9th day. Debate on the motion to take up the Civil Rights Bill is continuing as we talk here.
Well, this is surprisingly Phil Sparrow here at last. This is Folk Senate, and we're on WTBS in Cambridge.
You have some unbridgeable gaps in the world. Race, I think, is certainly one of them for some people. The U.S. as a whole was a segregated society at that time. But I was a prototypical white college kid at MIT. It didn't really seem to impact me very much.
The civil rights movement was very much in the air. I was conscious of it. My background was Northern, got a Yankee. The African-American way of life was very far removed from my world, the world, I think, pretty much of the folk revival.
The blues really was not a part of Cambridge. It was mostly that Irish, English, folk song tradition, and very little black music.
I was interested in the old-timey stuff, white and black. It moved me in ways that I still can't really explain before I do it. My grades were going downhill.
Phil Sparrow had won a scholarship to MIT and planned a career in aeronautical engineering, but with his grades suffering, he dropped out and took an entry-level job programming the world's earliest computers, leaving his nights free to concentrate on what mattered most to him. And he found a roommate who had also chosen music over college.
I knew Al Wilson through the Club 47. He had dropped out of the music program at Boston University the things that they offered weren't the things that Al wanted to learn. We couldn't afford a telephone between us, but we had a lot of music there. We had records. Al had all sorts of music that I knew nothing about. People like Charlie Patton, by Willie Johnson, Robert Johnson, Son House, Skip James. They were recorded in the 20s and 30s, but these were electrifying cuts.
I got something to tell you, baby, when I get the change. I got something to tell you, baby, when I get a change. Yeah, I know I'm happy, baby,
This music we call Delta blues or country blues. To the extent that any record of that existed in the 60s, it was in old 78s, you know, from the 30s. Library of Congress, anthologies, and so forth. You know, kind of frozen in amber.
There were these very scratchy dubs that you could barely hear, but they were so profound and so unearthly. And you thought, man, that's just back in the day when giants walked the earth.
Country blues was so obscure, you might say it had disappeared from America. It had long since fallen out of favor with African Americans. In the 1960s, black audiences were even turning away from electric blues as soul became more popular. But as the folk revival gained momentum, a handful of small labels began reissuing the records made during the Depression. And in college towns like Cambridge, a renewed interest in the country blues sprang up.
It was like being in a secret society. You know, now Robert Johnson is on a postage stand. But at that time, you know, it was just, who?
These guys were obsessed with this sound. It's not easy music to master. It also spoke to them of another way of life outside of the kind of deadening post-war suburban life they were born into. There was another life that was more expressive, that was more erotic, that was more dangerous.
And that was it. I mean, oh God. I didn't listen to rock and roll for years.
Anywhere this led me, anywhere the blues led me, I was ready to go. And at the start, who could ever imagine we'd ever see any of these people?
I think they really loved that music, wanted to get closer to it. But the story of the blues is riddled with inaccuracies and you know, all this kind of mythology. It was all mystery.
If there was any chance of these people still being alive, it was worth whatever effort we had to put in to get them in front of a microphone again.
They had the records, they had the recordings. But there was still so much we didn't know. If you were going on the information that was available to you on 78 RPM records, you know, it's not a lot.
And then, basically, Mississippi John Hurt was found by Tom Hoskins because John Hurt recorded a song in the 20s called Avalon Blues.
And now you're living here in Avalon, Mississippi? Yes. Yeah. Harold County? Yeah. And you're living with your wife, Jessie? That's right. And are those two children yours? Grandchildren. Grandchildren. Yeah.
This was the first time a major performer from the 20s or the 30s had been found, and we were thrilled.
The reemergence of Mississippi John Hurt was a defining moment in the folk revival. And as improbable as it was to find a lost bluesman through song lyrics, the idea stuck with a brilliant young guitarist in California, John Fahey.
This is a man who knew more about the blues than I ever learned. And no one could even play that stuff on the guitar. He spent years trying to learn how to play the way that people played on the records.
In 1963, after John Hurt was located, Fahey used a line in a song about Aberdeen, Mississippi, to track down another Depression-era legend, Booker White.
But April '64, Booker was playing the folk music circuit.
Booker White had some concerts in Cambridge and was staying with my friend Alan Wilson and Phil Spiro. Al and I were interviewing Booker. We more or less had a list of blues artists that we had heard old records of. We posed the name Son House, and he knew who Son House was. He said, yeah, a friend of mine saw him coming out of a movie theater, or told me that she saw him in Memphis.
This was a remarkable thing to hear. Among adherents of the country blues, Son House was one of the most celebrated figures. Rumored to have been a preacher, he sang with uncommon intensity, as if the blues was both the source and cure of some unholy cosmic ill. But his last recordings dated to the years of World War II, and it was unknown what became of him since.
I got home and Al said, the most amazing thing has happened. Booker says that a friend of his in Memphis saw Son House coming out of a theater last year. We didn't even know he was still alive.
He was last spotted, so to speak, in 1942 in Robinsonville, Mississippi. And no one in the folk circles, anyway, had any knowledge of whether he was still alive, whether he was in Robinsonville or had moved, or what had happened to him in those 22 years. But on the basis of that, a second-hand report of a sighting of Son House coming out of a movie theater, they wanted to organize an expedition.
I decided that we had to go look for him, we being Evans and Al and myself.
I was a student, so I couldn't go.
Al had a gig coming up and couldn't do it.
Phil, I think, needed somebody with a tape recorder and some money.
I called Tom Hoskins, the guy who had found John Hurt. He was not interested. He wouldn't say why, but he probably had better sense than I did. I asked him if he knew anybody who might be interested. And yes, he knew Nick Pearls, who was a record collector. And Pearls had a tape recorder and Pearls had a car. I called him and yes, he was interested. We needed a second driver since I never have driven. And that somebody was Dick Waterman.
I was 29. I was a sports writer at the time. I was writing also on the folk music business of Cambridge. They had a publication called Broadside.
Dick was a photographer to boot and a journalist. He could write it up. So I told him that I had a hot lead on Son House. Son who, he said?
I knew Louis Armstrong and Kid Ory and Johnny Dodds and knew all of the swing. I knew all of that. But country blues,
He hadn't heard of House, but that didn't surprise me because very few people had.
This is a man recorded for Paramount in 1930, recorded a few songs for Alan Lomax in Mississippi, 41-42, and vanished. Now here we are in 64, and Booker White said, I just went to the movies with him. Well, I think there's a story there. So I contacted the National Observer. They said, if you find him, we buy the story. If you don't find him, no interest. Well, that's all it took.
While Spiro and Waterman prepared to leave Boston, John Fahey was also planning a trip to Mississippi. Word had come to him of something that might lead to the most mysterious and elusive bluesman of all. Skip James had recorded in Grafton, Wisconsin for Paramount Records in the early 1930s. Among bluesmen of that era, James was special. He played guitar and piano with equal command, his songs drifting between extreme states of feeling, from jaunty celebrations of life to the most haunting tales of bitterness and desperation.
A lot of Skip songs have to do with money problems and the darkness of life. Universal things that have never changed and probably never will. People are drifting, they can't find no heaven, I don't care where they go. Hear me sing this old lonesome song, but small time can last me so very long.
Like Son House, Skip James was a phantom. His birthplace was the subject of debate. No photographs of him were known to exist, and no one, not even John Fahey, could decipher the tuning in which he composed his songs. Fahey had searched for James before, with no luck, yet he had reason to believe the summer of 1964 would be different.
Finally, springtime comes and it's time for me to make my annual journey through the Southland looking for Skip James. On all these trips, I asked everyone I met about blues singers. Nobody I talked to had ever heard of Skip James, but the blues grapevine informed me that Ishmael Bracey had turned up in Jackson, Mississippi. Bracey had recorded for the same company as James at about the same time. I set about organizing one more trip. I asked two friends, Henry Vestine and Bill Barth, to go collecting with me.
As Fahey and his friends started for Mississippi, Phil Spiro and Dick Waterman arrived in New York. They were about to meet the third member of their team.
The situation with Nick Pearls was really quite unexpected.
His family was extremely rich. The bottom floor was a gallery, an art gallery, the Pearls Gallery, and the residence were the 4 floors over the gallery, literally 5 stories of fine art.
My parents were not impressed by the blues. They didn't think that Black or African American culture was very interesting or something that their family should be involved in. But my brother was not too interested in doing what other people wanted him to do. What he wanted was blues.
He loved to listen to the bluesmen from the 20s and 30s, put on his headphones, smoke a little grass, get a little high, and then just drift away.
United by the dream of making contact with the blues' mythical origins, both elusive searchers were now on their way.
Going down south, I'm going down south, I'm going down south, I'm going down south. Chile, we're gonna go.
We left the second week of June, 3 Jews and Volkswagen by the New York plates.
Going with you, babe, I'm going with you, babe, I'm going with you, babe, I'm going with you, babe, don't care where you go.
Thought of getting a car and kind of pointing it south and thinking that it would be easy enough to find a performer like Sunhouse. I mean, it's like Bigfoot hunting. There was so little information for them to go on.
You look back on it and say, I must have been batshit to do things like that.
They may have been aware of what was happening in Mississippi, but the absolute danger and violence that was a reality for local Black Americans was an abstract notion for the average white college student.
To go into Mississippi in the summer of 1964, you had had to be either very brave, very stupid, or very uninformed. If I had known what was going on, I sure as hell would not have wanted to go to Mississippi at that point.
We can see what's happening in this country wherever segregation breaks down. The social structure breaks down at the same time.
In 1964, several things would happen. One was that blacks would, of course, be denied the right to vote and their basic rights as citizens of the country. And there's very little attention being given to that. Segregation was blatant. I mean, you had no question about the roles people had to play. And those blacks who were making a stand, or trying to make a stand, were dying. They were being killed.
For 250 years, the white man acted, the Negro reacted. And now the roles are being reversed. But as we are acting, the white man's reaction becomes the lynch mob, the rope, the gun, the bomb, the threatening telephone call, the cross.
There was just a terror associated with the word Mississippi in Black America. I mean, the policemen were members of the Klan. Daily violence was committed with impunity, and if you spoke out against the system, it was 10 times worse.
To us, it was a war. We were in a war.
The country couldn't see itself in all those murders that were happening. Well, that's basically what the issue was. Well, how do we get the country to actually take a good look at itself?
Freedom Summer was this idea that we need to gain citizenship, and one avenue and expression of that is going to be voting rights. But there was never going to be mass voting for black people in the South unless there was federal help.
We were getting shot, we were getting beat, we were getting killed, but it wasn't making no difference. So the idea came up that we gotta bring white folks to Mississippi. We knew that's the only way we were gonna get attention.
And it's not just any white people, right? It needed the sons and daughters of the people who were actually running the country. The country could take a look at itself through their eyes.
Almost 1,000 college students volunteered to spend the summer of 1964 in Mississippi. One was Andrew Goodman, a sophomore at Queens College. He had participated in a few civil rights demonstrations in New York and wanted to do more, even if it meant entering the most dangerous part of the South.
When your child said, I want to go, I want to do it, I want to register voters, I want to buck the Klan, you know, your heart sinks. But I wasn't going to tell him not to go. And so he had a duffel bag, and I would throw in bandages and iodine, and thought, well, you know, he'll probably get into some trouble, and maybe they'll beat him up or something like that. He ought to have something to take care of himself.
The idea was to keep the spotlight on Mississippi. I knew there were risks, but we had real tasks to do. Running Freedom School, doing voter registration, this was serious work.
So you had white college students coming from California and New York to move down to Mississippi for one summer to devote all of their time and effort to overturning Jim Crow segregation.
The first volunteers would arrive in Mississippi on Sunday, June 21st. And in the weeks before, the state went on alert.
We are not going to permit any outside group to come into this state and to drive the wedge of division and dissension and to subvert the very foundation pillars of the great government of the state of Mississippi and of our people.
It was tense, and we drove into this. We found a motel, a very modest motel, south of Memphis, just over the line in Mississippi by about a mile or so. And we used that as our headquarters for about 10 days that we were there.
To begin, they sought out Lillian Glover, the friend of Booker White, who was said to have seen Son House coming out of a movie theater.
It turns out to be a total dead end. There was nothing. It began and ended with her running into Son coming out of a theater a year ago, and she could learn nothing further.
So here we were, we're here. What do we do now?
Lord, this is a one highway.
We had no plan B, we had no backup. We were just three guys who barely knew each other, who were sharing a very harebrained idea of let's go down to Memphis and see what we can learn about Son House.
I said, please, please see somebody for me. I said, please, please see somebody for me.
Henry Vestine, Bill Barth, and John Fay first stopped in Jackson. They were going to talk to Bracey. Ashland Bracey was the blues man I had found a year earlier.
Geraldine Wardlow was a rare thing in 1964, a white Mississippian with the love of the blues. And while no one in Boston or Berkeley knew it, he had been looking for Son House and Skip James for months.
I was determined I'm going to find out where these guys are from, if they're alive or dead. Gotta learn how to find death certificates, use city directories, courthouse records. It was like an obsession, I admit.
Along the way, Wardlow had discovered the name of Skip James' hometown, but he could not keep that piece of information to himself.
I made the mistake of telling Bracey one time when I visited him, I found out where Skip James was from, Bentonia. That's all I said to him. Henry told me the story later on. He said we paid him $30, all our money we had, for information, and we asked him about where Skip James from. And he said, go to Bentonia.
There we were in Memphis, not knowing which end was up, but that we were there and we ought to do something that looked like looking for Son House. We had almost no information about Son. The records, such as they were, had information that his name was Eugene, he wore a cowboy hat, and he was fat.
Son House was last known to have lived in Robinsonville, just below the Mississippi-Tennessee line. Let's go to Robinsonville.
Black people who we did speak to were guarded, of course, because we were white, and they had no reason at all to trust us.
Three white kids in their 20s with New York license plates and New York accents? No, none of the black people were going to talk to them.
I mean, Mississippi, for young white people who might have come from New England or California, was really like a new world. You couldn't imagine it.
We can't go out on the plantation field. You know, you can't just go out there and tell the Negroes come out the plantation and go to the courthouse. What happened is in the town, we organize the town people, and then they have friends on the plantation.
The volunteers gather in Oxford, Ohio for training beginning on Sunday, June 14th. These are college students who are used to proms and pleasure and nightlife, and they're going to be living in basically in another century, in another culture.
It's rigidly segregated. Racial etiquette is harshly enforced, and by racial etiquette we mean, tipping your hat when white people pass by, certainly only speaking when you're spoken to, never being close to white women if you're a black man, really under the threat of death.
It was important for civil rights workers to realize that the white people felt as though they were under siege, and the way in which they behaved was illegal and violent.
They will arrest you and then will hold you for a couple of hours and dream up the charge because they don't have any particular ones to arrest you on. You must be prepared to face continual and constant arrest. They will fingerprint you and photograph you and wire your photograph around the state, so in case you show up anyplace else, they will know exactly who you are, where you're from, and all personal data about yourself.
Try to bring your knees all the way up to your elbows, don't cross your legs. Most likely a cop won't try to chunk you in here, but he will hit you across here. You can generally take those things.
We were quite aware of the danger that the volunteers be coming down would be faced. Whites, they'd be faced with the same danger as the blacks who live there.
We knew people had been beaten, we knew people had been murdered. We were talked with about the potential of that to happen.
If you were in an interracial car, for example, and you were driving into some little village, you had to make sure that you weren't there after dark.
Stay off the streets at night. Darkness seems to be an encouragement to many of these people to do a little bit more dirt. And another thing, I suggest we be a little more serious about this thing. I know it don't even seem real to you now, but it will when you go down to Mississippi.
We were having a train in Knoxville, and the kids were going to come down. So the Klan had decided they were going to make some examples of what's going to happen if you come down here.
And on Tuesday, June 16th, one of the churches that had agreed to be a freedom school had been burned, and the members of that church who had been holding the meeting had been beaten outside by the Klan.
During orientation in Ohio, Andrew Goodman was approached by the organizers who had been working in the area surrounding the burned church, James Chaney and Mickey Schwerner. They invited Goodman to join them for the summer. Chaney was a native of Meridian, Mississippi. Schwerner, a New Yorker who had moved to the state at the start of 1964.
I assigned them to the Meridian Project office there, where they went in and set up Freedom School and Freedom Library, and began to work on the voter registration pieces between Meridian and Philadelphia, Mississippi.
By June of 1964, the Klan had already begun to plot Mickey Schwerner's murder. Outsiders were not welcome and would not be tolerated.
It doesn't matter if you're looking for blues artists or blues records, or if you are trying to register voters, you are an outside agitator to white segregationists in Mississippi.
The people were welcoming, and obviously they didn't want to see cars with license plates from Massachusetts or Illinois or New York.
Since their own investigating had come to nothing, Pearls, Spiral, and Waterman appealed to another blues singer from the old days.
Robert Wilkins had been a wonderful, wonderful bluesman with a long recording history from the late 20s.
Dad had played all over the Delta. You know, he had played all over the Mississippi areas, you know, sang the blues from the hilltop to the bottom, you know.
Now, he was an ordained minister and had converted many of his best blues cuts into religious songs.
He knew a lot of musicians, you know, so he knew just about where they were playing at. And I think that's how they felt like Daddy should know these guys that were playing in these country tonks and all that kind of stuff.
He remembered some from the old days, and he agreed to help us.
And that'll be a way to get along. Well, old boy, got all he had, he's got on down the road, right on down the road. Got all he had, he's got on down the road. Got all he had, he's got on down the road. And that'll be a way to get along.
We went looking through Robinsonville and Lake Cormorant, which the locals call Lake Carmen.
He would roll down the windows and talk to an older black person about who we were looking for, so they would speak to us through him.
Got away from home, and spent all that he had, spent all that he had. Got away from home, and spent all that he had. Got away from home, and spent all that he had. And there's no way to get along. Can you imagine? We white kids and one black guy in a Volkswagen. Yeah, in a Volkswagen.
He guided us in what to do and what not to do, and when in doubt, we kept our mouths shut and let him lead.
He had ideas about where to look and who to talk to that we had no notion.
Put down the road as if I was seen. Put down the road as if I was seen. And that'll be a way to get along.
Driving around in a New York bug with a black minister was perhaps not the smartest thing we could have done, but he was willing to do it, and so were we.
There was one episode that's really indelible in my mind. We were going way out the field, totally rural, just out of the cotton fields. And there was a pickup truck with a couple of white men lounging on the hood. And Reverend Wilton said, "Stop here and I'll ask." We didn't want any part of this. But if he said, "We're gonna ask, we're gonna ask." He stopped the car, the Reverend opened the door, got up, and said, "I'm looking for such and such a street. Can you tell me where it is?" They looked at him and then they went back to talking. And he said to them, "Look here, I'm talking to you. I'm looking for such and such a street." The silence was palpable. They looked at it and they said, "Go down the road so far, take a left and go so far." And the Reverend touched his hand. He said, "Thank you, I'm much obliged to you, gentlemen." Nodded his head and back in the car, turned away.
We get to Bentonia. We find some of Skip James's relatives who try to help us, but really can't. Even relatives of James find him hard to pin down. An aged uncle tells us that James lives in a town or city near Tunica, Mississippi. The first letter of the name of this town is, he thinks, a D, Dunkirk, Dubs, D, Denton, but he's really not sure. But one thing he is certain, the end of the rainbow is near Tunica.
On Friday, June 19th, after a 3-month-long filibuster, the Civil Rights Act finally passed the Senate. Segregation was now illegal in America's restaurants, hotels, and other public spaces.
We say to limit these judgments, all of the music bigger. If they can take this Civil Rights Act and say, "Oh, no, it's going to go enough, they'll get burned before it's over with."
Many Southerners pledged defiance of the law, and those leaving for Mississippi could expect no help from the government.
We most certainly do not and will not give protection to civil rights workers. In the first place, the FBI is not a police organization.
J. Hooper made this open statement that we're not going to be protecting people. In other words, he was saying it's open season. Go get it.
The nation is not a democracy simply because I can vote when I become 21 in New York City, but only if everyone can vote and practice his right as a citizen. And the federal government, I think, has betrayed its responsibility to enforce the Constitution of our country in Mississippi.
Did you talk this over with your parents before you made the decision?
Yes, I discussed it with them. They felt, of course, what I feel is fear of what might happen there. Arrest is actually beneath the votes.
This chase is thoroughly difficult because we do not even comprehend what we are looking for. There is danger lurking around us. Something big, growing bigger, the civil rights storm. Everywhere we go, there are eyes watching. The hunters are being hunted. Why do you think we're gonna give the vote to blacks? We couldn't possibly be looking for old blues singers. Nobody does that, not even crazy people. Several times, we will be accosted by police, guns drawn and pointing. "What are you boys doing fooling around with our Negroes? Don't you know you can get in trouble for fooling around with our Negroes?"
When Mickey decided to go back to Mississippi, he went back at the most dangerous time, which was just before everybody was going back.
Mickey left the training one day early because he wanted to get back down there and go out and talk to the people in that church about what had happened. So he drove down and took James Chaney and Andrew Goodman from Queens College with him.
They said, "Mom, there's a church that's burned," so there are a couple of kids who were driving down there, and I'm going with them. I thought, oh God.
They drove down in a station wagon on Saturday, June 20th. the day after the Civil Rights Bill passes the Senate.
When I met Annie Goodman, he was with Nicholas Swarman and James Chaney on the way back from Oxford. And I was surprised to see Goodman in the car. Goodman was really insistent on riding with Chaney and Swarman. I shook his hand and spoke to him and welcomed him to the state. I knew he was going to Meridian, but I had no idea, because I would have objected to his going to Philadelphia, because he was too green. And so they went on to Meridian, and I went opposite direction to Shreveport.
"20 miles from Tunica, near Dubs, we stopped at a gas station. I engaged the young black gas pumper in conversation leading up to the person of my quest. I had been doing this for years to no avail. But now, something very interesting happens. I don't know if this is the right guy you're looking for, but one night I was over at Benny Simmons' barbershop in Dubs, and this crazy drunk old man came over and started yelling and screaming at us. But one of the things he raved about was that he used to be a famous and great blues singer, and that he played guitar and piano. Said he made all kinds of records in Wisconsin, kept yelling at us saying he was a genius. Finally, the key words: crazy, genius, guitar and piano, Wisconsin. It had to be James.
At the same time, only 30 miles away, the team looking for Sunhouse seemed to have a lead. Thanks to Reverend Wilkins, they found a man whose ex-wife was believed to be Sunhouse's stepdaughter. Now she lived in Detroit.
We called that number and we said, your mother is married to Eugene House, the blues singer? No, she's married to a man who used to sing the blues, but it's not Eugene, it's Eddie. Well, we'll take that. Okay, now where is he? Oh, he lives in Rochester, New York.
We almost gave up at that point.
So, on Sunday, June 21, we spoke to a man named Eddie House. We had a list there. Eddie House, they call his son? Yeah, they call his son. Did you know Charlie Patton and Robert Johnson? Did you record for Lomax? Did you go to Grafton, Wisconsin to make records for Paramount? There's this long pause, and he said, say, who is this anyway? And we said, well, we're just blues fans, and we just want to know, yeah, I did them things. I know them fellas. And we went, we covered the gap.
He was as surprised as we were. Nobody had expressed the slightest interest in his music for over 25 years.
He said, I put my wife on the phone. She said, he's an old man, he don't play no more. He said, well, there could be some money in it for him. He could go back to making records and making money. She said, well, I suppose we could talk about that.
John Fahey, Bill Barth, and Henry Vestine, acting on the tip given to them at the gas station, reached Benny Simmons' barbershop that same Sunday, June 21st. They were shown to a house across the street. On his porch sat Skip James's wife. She told them that her husband was in Tunica's hospital, recovering from a cancer operation.
A black nurse takes us to the black ward. How you feeling, Mr. James? There's some boys here who want to talk with you about music. Is that all right? The silent figure nods his head.
It was Skip James. What a tremendous and exciting moment for those three guys to find that man. It's incredible. I mean, it's really incredible.
And Dr. King is looking very sad. Dr. King is looking very sad. Dr.
the three, this was the climactic moment, the fulfillment of an impossible quest. And they spun a grand design, talking of a record contract and a tour to go with it. James eyed his searchers doubtfully, unsure if he could trust them. And days removed from an operation, the doctors forbade his release. Come back later, he said.
I got a long trip, I'm just too weak to ride. I got a long trip, I'm just too weak to ride. I got a long trip, I'm just too weak to ride. Now it's 1,000 people now standing at my bedside. It takes long, you can bruise my bones. It takes long, you can bruise my bones. It takes long, you can bruise my bones. But you really miss me when I'm dead.
It was somewhere in the vicinity of the church that James Chaney was arrested on a traffic violation Sunday by a sheriff's deputy. Chaney and his white companions, Mickey Schwerner and Andy Goodman, were taken to the Neshoba County Jail where Chaney was booked on the traffic charge. The others held for investigation. Their names appear on the docket for that day.
I got a call in, it was about 6 o'clock that evening on the 21st. They had not heard from Mickey, and so I asked what time were they supposed to check in. And so they said 4 o'clock. And so I knew. The fact is that he and James Chaney, he said 4 o'clock, they were going to check in at 4 o'clock.
But people in the office called the police, they called hospitals, they called other places, and they could not be located. The police didn't admit that they had them, and they couldn't be found.
Eventually, about 10:30 p.m., the deputy says, they were released after Chaney paid a $20 fine. The deputy says the trio left the jail by car. He accompanied them in another car through part of Philadelphia and got them on the Mississippi Route 19 for Meridian and the point from which they had started. So far as is known, the three never got there.
Chaney, Goodman, and Schwerner disappeared on Sunday, June 21st, the same day Sunhouse and Skip James were found. As the summer project got underway, the search for the missing activists began.
Every day, nothing seems to change. Everywhere I go, I keep seeing the same old thing, and I can't take it no more. Oh, I will leave this town, but I ain't got nowhere else to go.
The danger of Mississippi was no longer a rumor. While waiting for Skip James to get out of the hospital, Fahey and his friends were mistaken for civil rights workers and thrown in jail. Spared the fate of their counterparts in Philadelphia, they were released after one night. As Fahey and James prepared to leave Mississippi, the freedom schools and registration drives opened, despite more bombings and beatings.
Wake up in the morning, more bad news than I. Sometimes I feel like I was born to lose, and drive me out of my mind.
No, I do not have any regrets, because if I did, it would mean I didn't believe ardently the reason that they are down there.
Oh, I'll be ready now.
June 23rd. We reached 61 Greek Street in Rochester.
This is it, boys, 2 weeks on the road. Here it is.
There was a thin guy sitting on the stoop.
We said, you know if Mr. and Mrs. Eddie House live on the 4th floor? Yes, they do. So as we started up the steps, he said, but he ain't in there. I turned and said, he's not? How do you know? And the man said, because I'm him.
So we had finally met Son House. When we went off looking for Son, we didn't know if he was 40 or 100. We didn't know if he ever cared to record again. Anything could have been the result.
We asked him if he would play. He hadn't played in many, many years. His hands were shaking, tremors. But he took the guitar and looked down at his hand for a long time and then...
You got a letter this morning. I ring and ring. You say, hurry. The gal you love is there. Got a letter this morning. Yeah, I ring and ring. You say, hurry. Because the gal you love is there.
I had heard Reverend Daniels and Mississippi John, and they were just, it was like children. And the man had walked in.
I grabbed a bus key, and I took out down the road. I said, when I got there, she's mad on a fooling world. You know, I thought I'd never love but 4 women in my life. My mother, my sister, kid, girl, and my wife. I thought I'd never love. I said, but 4 women in my life. I said, my mother, my sister, my kid, girl, and my wife.
So here's Son 34 years from the original 1930s recordings, rusty as hell, but recognizably Son House. We felt great at that point.
We looked at each other and we said, wow, what have we found? What have we got here?
The obvious thing to do was to see if we could get him on the Newport Folk Festival, which was a few weeks away.
The Newport Folk Festival, held in Rhode Island in July, was the most important event of the folk revival. Its 4 days of concerts and workshops attracted an audience that was slowly morphing into the counterculture for which the 60s would be known. Newport was Woodstock before there was Woodstock, the place where Joan Baez became a star, and where Mississippi John Hurt enjoyed the first days of his triumphant second act in 1963.
So we called the Newport people. We said, we just found Son House, a great Son House had been found. And they said, yeah, we just had a call that Skip James had been found. 3 guys from California found him the same day in Tunica Hospital. I said, what are you talking about? We just came from 2 weeks in Tunica, right outside of Tunica.
It was in Newsweek magazine saying that 2 great blues icons had been recently discovered, Skip James and Son House. That's where I found out. It broke my heart, man. They happened to find the right person who knew where James was living, whereas I've been up there 2 or 3 times, didn't find that person. It is, in a sense, it's luck, but you know what? You make your luck.
Sitting on the tree,
skip, but we need to bring them up north. And so I went there to do that. After meeting John Hurt and Booker, I kind of expected another outgoing person. And then suddenly here was Skip. And he was totally different. Skip was an intellectual. He was interested in time and motion studies. And so he was not as empathetic, I guess you would say. He was more reserved on his own.
I don't have an afternoon one of you to talk, and this gives me to go over that.
You don't sing other people's songs.
I don't sing other people's songs.
Skip really thought of himself as an artist and had a big disappointment that he should have been a star.
He's on his deathbed, practically, by the time, people find him. It's almost like he was waiting for somebody from out there to kind of get the memo that, I'm important and you need to recognize this, And that was his stance.
I just wonder where you learned that song.
That's not yours to know. But if you want to learn it, then you come to after my playing.
Oh, see,
You get an idea from me, but where I learned it, you might not never know.
Unless
I
you
can
tell
never
me.
go there.
Unless you tell me.
Well,
That's why I'm asking you.
I use my own words, and I compose my own thing.
Yeah.
The record doesn't talk back, it doesn't make demands of you. It's an easy thing to love, it's an easy thing to control. It's really different when you have a musician, sitting a few feet away from you.
You just have to deal with all the messy complications of who this person is as a human being, the contradictions, the paradoxes. They actually are not frozen in amber,
Now, just to tell the truth about it, I was brought up in church from a little boy on up, and I didn't believe in no blues or none of. I was too churchy. I didn't believe in that, and I talked to Jesse.
Sunhouse, he had a problem, I guess, coming to terms with the, church and, the blues and just kind of not going together. And the way he played, he would just, just go someplace else.
We found later that son was an alcoholic. He needed the booze to play. He needed medication to keep from the shakes. I couldn't believe how bad it could get. And would we be able to do anything that would prepare him for Newport?
Most of those guys on the Saturday night fish ride, you drop the dimes and nickels in the hat as he played. And as soon as you get enough, you would look and go get a quarter bill, bottle of wine, jug of wine. And they played for fun all night. Sunhouse, he got all his life, so how can you change a 75-year-old man into a 26-year-old rock star, superstar? Don't let him not let him get a drink till he go to the stage.
Charlotte Gladden, Willie Brown, and Robert Johnson, and they died one after the other. That scared me, and I said, well, maybe it was all unmixed. And I got scared and quit playing for 16 years until Mr. Dick Waterman found me and gave me nerve enough to try it again.
We went down there and asked these people to come up with us without a thought that this might be a strange thing to do or a stupid thing to do. Just, this must be done. We didn't have any plan B. If the gigs didn't come through, we didn't have any money either.
For Sunhouse and Skip James, we couldn't have been more marginal. To go to the Newport Festival at that point in time, given how important it was to white America, it does give them that kind of national historical stage. They have the opportunity to connect with a broad American public.
Yeah, my mama don't lie to me. Yes, it's still out all night long. I didn't care what she didn't lie. Lord, I was booey-wooey, and I
backyard was full of these big old houses, and one of them later became called the Blues House. When we arrived, they were a day ahead of schedule. There was already a party going on, and that party lasted for days.
Probably the greatest gathering of acoustic blues men ever assembled.
I'm going down to the river. I sit down on the ground.
The son was there, Skip was there.
John Hurt, Fred McDowell from Culver, Mississippi.
I'm on the way to the world. Lord, the voice my trouble down.
Each blues man had his own bedroom. You would listen to Fred McDowell do a song or two and go down the hall, and Sleepy John Estes would be playing.
Sleepy John Estes, Hammy Nixon.
Elizabeth Cotton, a wonderful woman, great guitarist. Robert P. Williams from Louisiana.
Jesse Fuller was there.
Muddy Waters was there too. And coincidentally, Reverend Robert Wilkins had been booked to play at the festival, and it was nice to see him again. Son came to Newport. He took sick and he was immediately hospitalized, so he didn't appear there.
He had a pain in his abdomen that was never fully diagnosed.
But it didn't cause any kind of a ripple, because if you had never heard him, you didn't know what you were going to hear.
Oh, push you, need a job and let you back on the roof and hang up. Mommy, tell me to shake up, down like you
That weekend, the only thing I can compare it to was the first year that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame began, and Chuck Berry, Little Richard, James Brown, Fats Domino, they were all inducted at the same time. You'd be walking around and say, oh, there's James Brown, oh, there's Jerry Lee Lewis, you know. That was what it was like in Newport. It was like walking around among the stars. But all of it paled, all of it was obliterated, for me, by Skip James's performance that afternoon.
In '64, the Blues Workshop was the place to be. They played on a low palette, and there were just people, probably a couple of thousand people.
At that workshop that Saturday afternoon, where Skip appeared, I mean, when he came out, there was no idea what to expect.
He had made some scratchy 78s in 1931, and now, 33 years later, a legend coming back in the flesh to make music.
He's up there on stage, and he's got a guitar that clearly isn't his, that he borrowed. And he's wearing his black preacher's hat and his sort of suit, and there's this pause. Truly historic moment. That greatness such as this will not pass my way again.
time for a full week of horse racing, merrymaking, and political speeches. But this year, there was another big event here, a tragic one. 3 civil rights workers were murdered 6 weeks ago, and their bodies were discovered last week a scant 2 miles from the fairground.
They found the bodies. The police and the Klan were the people responsible for their deaths. I had it. And then I go to the memorial services. I get to talk. And I see Ben King sitting there. And I just see everybody. And I just lose it. I just lost it.
So I stand here, a lot of things pass through my mind. I can remember the Emmett Till case, what happened to him, and what happened to the people who killed him. I'm sick and tired, I can't help but feel better, you see. Deep down inside, I'm not going to stand here and ask anybody in here not to be angry tonight. Each and every one of us as individuals are going to have to take it upon ourselves and put leaders in our community. Block by block, house by house, city by city, county by county, state by state throughout this entire country. Those neighbors down there who are too afraid to come to this memorial, take them to another memorial. Pick them up and take them down there. Make them register to vote. And you register to vote. I doubt if 1/4 of this house is ready. Go down there and do it.
If it hadn't been for Mickey Swan and Andrew Gooden, and regardless what I done or what I said, that I don't believe that my son would have been known, would have been found today. Nobody would have just went on. They would have never known nothing happened.
No matter all that work we did, all the suffering we did, all the jail arrests and beatings and murders, we weren't getting no attention. When those 2 kids got killed, those 2 black boys in New York got killed, you saw it.
And that is the tragic truth of the Freedom Summer Project, that you have to use the white volunteers in order to capture the attention of the American public and in order to challenge the collective consciousness of white America.
It was all over the news. It was all over the international news. It did bring about the desired focus on what was going on in the Deep South.
It forced the country to say voting is a matter of life and death in Mississippi. It created enormous momentum for what became the Selma Movement and the Voting Rights Act of 1965.
The country was shamed into doing this. I don't think it was because the people passed it said this is the right thing to do or felt that way, but they said this is the thing we gotta do in order to preserve our status in the world as a free country. And so that's what how we forced the hand of the country to do what was right.
One of the big mistakes in my own thinking was that I never anticipated how resistant the other side would be and that they would never give up. So that we could win things, and if we were then complacent about winning the right to vote or improving education, the other side would turn around and try and undercut it.
It took the left-wingers and the integrationists 58 years to get the Supreme Court to change its mind and reverse the separate but equal concept. But I'm sure, ladies and gentlemen, it won't take us that long to reverse the Black Monday decision. In fact, it won't take us that long, my friends, to change the Supreme Court of the United States.
These things are an infection that's in the subconscious, of American culture. So Black Americans are constantly trying to affirm, prove their humanity, and other people are actively working in the other direction.
You have to keep telling the story, you have to keep reaching out, and you have to keep an eye on what the other people are doing to take back what they feel that they lost.
In the 60s, a lot of attention was brought to the way in which Black lives were made not to matter institutionally. Black people kind of emerged in the public eye as a community, as a people who were definitely feeling the swing of a certain momentum towards justice, towards recognition, towards visible presence, you know, in American life, in a way we really hadn't been seen before. But I don't think that would have been as potent, you know, would have been as deeply felt, you know, without the musical presence.
For my generation of white Southerners, we grew up thinking that we were destined to use big words and run the world, but that Black people had the keys to the human heart. And that's why we wanted to court our girlfriends to Black music. Somehow we believed that Black people had a key, had a deeper understanding of that. Little did most white people realize that this Black-led movement in Mississippi about Moses, they had more profound ideas about our own democratic theories than we did. They were really leaders in what the promise of democracy really was. But music was the forerunner. It was ahead of politics.
These guys, many of them didn't have a career in the first place as musicians. They made a couple of records and went back to being a railroad porter, itinerant preacher, or whatever. But Newport, 1964, put a stamp on country blues as something that was worth public attention. So if they wanted a career, they could have one.
Sunhouse and Skip James did have another career, living just long enough to witness their own resurrection. Skip died of cancer in 1969. Sunhouse retired for good not long after, but never again did their blues retreat into obscurity, and they were honored by their native state, something that would have been unthinkable in 1964. In one of history's least predictable turns, the music, created by scorned and oppressed people, became the pride of Mississippi.
Blues revival had an immeasurable impact, I think, on the course of popular music, certainly, and really inadvertently kind of seeded the whole second wave of rock and roll.
We tend to focus on the story of young whites appropriating blues, you know, becoming millionaires, you know, in the 60s, but I think they were very much an instrument of history and of Black culture. You know, in the case of Faith and Bartman, I mean, they basically spend the rest of their lives in service to what that music represented to their younger selves.
We were just nerdy guys into the music. But the day that we actually found sun, my life pivoted. My life has never been the same since.
That was when I found out I could go out in the world and achieve things, and important things. Now these men's names and their art and their knowledge will live on forever.
I want to live so God can use me anywhere, anytime. I want to live so God can use me anywhere. So it's anytime.
do it, Michelle?
So we're just going to take a few seconds to set up and transition into the Q&A. So if you guys have to go to the restroom or want to get a drink, everything's that way. We'll reconvene in about 5 minutes. Okay. Check, check, check.
So we'll start in it. We'll start in a few minutes. Sam will be here. He's on his way, and he's really worth waiting for. He is. I would say if there is royalty in independent film in New York, Sam is certainly a member of the New York independent film royalty. So just hold on.
He's apparently on his way. Sorry, where? We don't know what happened, but the guy's on track.
Okay, Sam is here.
Man has arrived.
Man has arrived. He's putting himself together. So, as I just said, if there is royalty in independent film, in the New York documentary and other kinds of independent community, Sam Pollard would definitely be part of this royalty. He is a very important and wonderful filmmaker, as you can see. He has a sparkling career, which I'm going to tell you a little about. I couldn't memorize it all because there's so much of it. I'll tell you a little, though. Of course, he's been nominated for an Academy Award. He's won several Emmys. He's known as a producer, a director, and an editor. He's directed and produced several noteworthy documentaries. Eyes on the Prize 2, America, the Racial Crossroads, etc. The really beautiful one, I think, is Zora Neale Hurston, Jump at the Sun for the American Masters. He also worked with Spike Lee on a number of films as an editor, and including, he edited Mo Better Blues, Jungle Fever, Girl 6, Clockers, Bamboozled, When the Levees Broke. And then Sam Pollard and Spike Lee co-produced a couple of documentaries. There he is. This is Sam Pollard. They co-produced a couple of documentaries, including Spike Lee Presents Mike Tyson. Is that one? Four Little Girls. And the couple of films about New Orleans, right? He teaches in the social documentary department here. As I said at the beginning, he's been an advisor to students over a number of years. But I want to tell you a couple of little personal stories. I hope this doesn't embarrass you, Sam. So Sam and I were young editors in the early 80s, working in rooms next to each other on, I wonder if you remember these films. Some films that I don't know if Sam would want to admit it, but I'm kind of happy to admit it. One was for Bob Guccione. If you know who Bob Guccione was, he was the Pawn King. But he produced a science series for television called Omni. Sam and I had editing rooms, different editing rooms on that. And then after that, we went on to work on the first interactive video projects in the world, actually. First public interactive video projects for the Knoxville, Tennessee World's Fair. Other people in this room also worked on that project. Anyway, so that's my so Sam and I have known each other for a long time. Anyway, so now sit down and we will start to talk about this film.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. How are you? Graham, thanks for inviting me.
Pleasure. So Sam, tell us how this project came about.
About 3.5 years ago, a young man named Ben Hadeen had found my email address. It's looked at my website, my IMDb page, and he approached me about wanting to do a documentary that was going to do two things. He wanted to do a documentary that would take place in the summer of 1964, when these young white guys, Dick Waterman and John Fahey and some other guys, went searching down from Mississippi for two blues iconic legends, Son House and Skip James. But he also said to me he also wanted to tell the story at the same time what was happening in Freedom Summer in Mississippi, when young white kids from colleges were going down to fight for the voting rights for the African Americans in the community. And my initial reaction was, I applauded both ideas, but I said, Ben, it's really very difficult to make those two things come together. And I initially said, I think we should find someone else. I backed away from it. But then he's a very persuasive young man, and he kept coming back, and he kept telling me, giving me more stories and more stories about Fahey and Dick Waterman and all the other guys looking for these musicians. And I knew the music. I knew the blues music. And I said, well, okay, I think this is something we could try to get a handle on. And so we began that journey 3.5 years ago. And our first interview, the first interview that we shot, was with Lucinda Williams in California, I think in around 2013, the summer of 2013. And the other thing I should say is that this film, we applied for a couple of grants, we got no money. But this young man was a first-time producer, never made a film in his life, but he raised every dime. I don't know how he did it. I never asked, really. But he raised every dime to get this film made, you know, including that wonderful animation, which cost a lot of money. So
Let me talk to you about the structure, because if you didn't know what you were coming to watch, you'd really think for the first 15 minutes or so that it was a music film. Right. And then it slowly creeps up in you that it's actually not a music film and it has a lot more substance to it. So how did you come up with that? How did you think that should be the way you should put it together?
Well, you know, as Graham knows, the editing process is a long and protracted one, and you go down a lot of rabbit holes to get it right. And so we knew that we wanted to start with the blues music. The challenge was how long to stay with the blues musicians and the searchers before we went to the civil rights activists. You know, in the first cut, I think we were with the blues musicians for 30 minutes. And we all knew when we watched the first rough cut, myself, Ben, and the co-producer / editor, David Winsonet, we all knew that that was much too long. So it was that editorial process where we say, okay, how long can we hold on before we need to know that we need to get to the civil rights story? You know, and luckily when we got those guys to go down Mississippi, going down south, that was the way to get us into the first part of the story. And then we had to editorially figure out when to get out of the South, to get back to the music, how long to stay in the music the second time to get back to the South. And it was that editing process where you're never quite 100% sure until you put it together and you try it.
I thought it was a very brave structure in a way to hold with our music for so long, because I mean that we have to face it as a kind of limited audience for that music.
Absolutely.
I just happened, even though I was in England at that time, I happened to have been a big fan myself, but. Right. It was a kind of a rebellious thing to do, to be interested in that music.
But one of the things we understood, I said to Ben and to Dave as we were starting the process, I said, you know, I've done a lot of historical docs, but I think it's going to be very important in telling this story that we bring in some contemporary musicians who love that music. And so you could see, Albert Youngblood Hart. You could see the North Mississippi All-Stars. You could see Chris Thomas King. You could see Gary Clark Jr. So we could keep bringing it up to the present. So you would see these contemporary musicians. It was so that would keep you engaged in the material.
Well, one of the things that works so well with the contemporary musicians, and of course the blues singers from the 30s, is that the music you use to shape the way we feel about the images all the way through, and it's done very effectively and subtly, so you never think to yourself, you never feel manipulated by the music or anything like that. And also, using it as source music rather than scoring, and then turning it from source into scoring is a very wonderful and kind of subtle idea, because you think, oh, I'm listening to the music as a historical kind of document, but then it kind of creeps in underneath the pictures and shapes it, and that I thought was really beautifully done.
Graham got it. That's exactly what that was the task.
Thank you.
And we accomplished it.
Well, I don't think I was the only one in the room that got it. Tell us about the animation and how you made that decision to use animation.
I have to take my hat off to Dava. As some of you may know, and Graham knows, sometimes when you're trying to do these historical stories and you start searching for archival material, you come up empty. And there was no material of these guys traveling south. No material of Fahey and Dick, and all the other guys traveling to search for Son and Skip. So we had two alternatives. One alternative was to do reenactments where you find actors, you get period cars, and you head down south and you shoot it that way. David had seen the film Searching for Sugar Man. I don't know if anybody remembers that film. It had some wonderful animation in it, which she really liked. And she said, why don't we get in touch with that company, Apparat, which is based in Sweden. So we reached out to Apparat, and we started this back and forth through Skype, talking about the ideas that we wanted, how we wanted to visualize it. We would send them some rough schematics. They would send us back more fleshed out schematics. It was a back and forth process, and we worked with them for about, I guess, 9 months, 10 months. But when we got finally asked to be at Full Frame last April, I think they asked us in February. We needed about 2 more minutes of animation done, and Apparat couldn't do that. I mean,
2 minutes is a lot of
animation. Yeah, they said it was going to cost a lot more money. They couldn't do it in that amount of time, like 4 weeks. So there's another company up there that also did some animation that was based in California. But it was David's original idea. It was a great idea. It was the first time I had used animation in the film, and I was very pleased with it.
One of the things that I liked so much about the animation is you saw these old men's faces. I should talk, right? But you saw these old men's faces on screen talking to us, and then as young men, of course, they were animated figures a lot of the time. And that was a funny kind of...
That's right.
Yeah, it was a very funny and interesting idea that I have to say I've never seen that before. We're quite used in film to seeing, the young man and then the old face, and you try to compare them. But now the young men are animated figures.
That's right.
That was really great
come to
and
life.
funny.
Yeah. It really worked out well.
Yeah. So this idea of these 2 events happening at the same moment, when did you find out about that?
Ben knew that.
Ben knew that already.
Ben knew that. He had done his research. He knew that. He knew that the day that Son and Skip were both found by these 2 separate groups, that was the same day that Cheney, Schwerner, and Goodman went missing. He knew it. So we always knew that was the trajectory we were going toward,
One of the things that's, for me, is so kind of contemporary about this film is, as we know, this country has become, in a lot of ways, 2 countries again. And we're much more, and maybe it's always been so. But this film, maybe the borderlines are in a different place, but the parallels that you brought to the end, I thought were very strong, very interesting.
It's the understanding that history repeats itself, and the things that happened in the past will continue to happen unless this country can figure it out.
So one last question, one last comment I have for you, and then we'll open it up for questions. I love this idea that the music is ahead of politics. So can you just talk about kind of what do you think about that?
Well, every time Taylor Branch says that in the film, I always say, is that right?
Right.
Is that true? I kind of always scratch my head a little, but I kind of think it does. I kind of think it is. I kind of think that when you think about music in America, a lot of that music sort of foreshadowed what was going to happen. The blues, jazz, R&B, hip hop, sort of foreshadows what's going to happen in America in the next 10, 12 years. So I kind of think Taylor's correct, when he says it, and it's a potent thing to show you how important musical culture can be in a society. Yeah.
Okay, so who has a question?
The young lady's got a Someone must have a question. It's always a question or a comment. Yes, Miss.
First of all, it was an amazing film.
Thank you very much.
Really amazing. But towards the end, when he's talking about how it'll take 50 more years for the Supreme Court to turn around, and right now what's happening, and with Sessions, I kept thinking about Sessions through the whole thing because he was probably down there screaming his head off. What timing? How did it feel that you were making this movie and our world was...
We didn't realize it was...
When did you finish the movie?
We finished it over a year ago.
Well, you had a suspicion, no?
Who knows in America,
It was creepy seeing that.
It's creepy.
Hi. I was curious about all archival materials. It was hard to collect all of them. Some looks that they are from private archive, or maybe you can tell more about.
A lot of it's been seen in many other documentaries. A lot of it's been seen in Eyes on the Prize and in Freedom Summer by Stanley Nelson. A lot has been seen. I think the thing that makes it feel different this time is the way we've sort of interconnected it with the music. That gives it a different flavor. Normally, when you see this archival material, you hear a lot of gospel songs. You know, I ain't gonna let nobody turn me around. Keep your eyes on the prize. But we flipped it, so that's why I think it feels fresh to people. You know, we had a couple of researchers who really wanted. You know Sheila Manair? You know Sheila? Yeah, Sheila Manair was one of the researchers. She did a great job unearthing some of this stuff, you know, and it was always going back into that deep archive to look at the Library of Congress or other places to find the material, you know. So it's really not so fresh. It's just the way we've used it gave it a new freshness to me. Any other questions, comments? So is this your class?
No.
Oh, it's just a screen.
No, this is open to the public.
Oh, it's just open to the public. Oh.
Which musician impressed you most that you got to meet?
I'm sorry?
What musician impressed you most on this journey of making the film?
Gary Clark Jr. You know, I'd heard his music before. You know, he's even in a John Sayles movie. You ever seen a John Sayles movie he's in?
No, which one?
Yeah, it's about a blues musician in Alabama, and I kind of knew his music, and we were trying to get him to say yes, and then his management finally said yes. We had to fly down to Austin. It was like a one-day shoot. We flew down to Austin in the morning, went to this bar where he hangs out and plays on his off time, lit the bar. He came in. I think we shot him for like an hour and 20 minutes with 3 cameras. That guy, he's some musician. I was really impressed. He really impressed me. Of all of them, he impressed me the most. Yeah. Who's that? Is that Nicole?
Hey, Sam.
Hey, Nicole.
I had a question about the music selection. How did you come about with the songs that you were going to use? Did you come up with the structure first and then use the music to determine, then choose the music that fit it best, or did you have songs that you wanted to use?
Oh, you know, we always knew we were going to use all the songs that were made famous by Sun and Skip. It's a definite. So every time we went to one of these musicians, they all knew the catalogs of Sun and Skip. The opening music was Gary Clark's music from an album, which we used when we started to do the trailer. And then we hired a composer to do some underscoring throughout the film. But most of the music was Sun and Skip. And we knew those were the songs we were going to use throughout the film. Yes, sir.
I'm just wondering what Sun and Skip, if there's any knowledge, it's not exactly in the film, of their reaction to Newport, to this mostly white event, which was remarkable at the time for its love of music, jazz, and everything else. I mean, they must have been blown away by this experience.
Sun House, you know, he didn't perform in '64 New House because he got sick, but he did come back in '65. And Sun was always very happy about how things turned around for him. And Dick Waterman was really loved Sun House. He really loved Sun House. Skip was a more ornery guy. I don't think he appreciated it at all. He always knew he was good. He never had any question. And he didn't sort of feel the same way that Sun and all the other guys and ladies felt. You know, it was his time. He just thought it was his time. You know, he was an ornery cuss, that guy. You know.
I mean, that was white America in Newport.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
And
that was
privileged white America.
Oh yeah, yeah.
It was a different world.
Different world.
Most of us knew.
Yeah. But Sun was very happy.
Sam, what are you working on now?
A few things. February 20th on PBS, a documentary that Nicole, who's one of the producers worked on with me, that I supervised and directed, called The Talk, Race in America, a 2-hour show that looks at that talk that parents of color have with their children about how to deal with the police.
Oh.
It's going to be some interesting segments. And then a film that I'm co-directing with a young man named Ruben Atlas about Acorn. Remember Acorn?
Sure.
Acorn just got into the Tribeca Film Festival.
Fantastic.
Yeah, so we're finishing that up. And next year, a documentary that also Nicole worked on as line producer about Sammy Davis Jr. for American Masters. So, trying to make a living.
But you're succeeding. That's a nice shot.
Thanks. Thank you all for coming out. I really appreciate it.
Thanks very much.